This is OTR FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. And before I introduce this week's guest, I just want to take a moment to share a recommendation with you. If you're struggling with making important decisions, check out a book called The Necktie and the Jaguar by retired clinical psychologist, Jungian analyst, and shamanic practitioner Carl Greer, in which he reveals how he tapped into the wisdom and the power of unseen worlds for guidance and inspiration. It's a fascinating memoir in which he offers some valuable keys and questions that inspire the kind of thinking that guides you effortlessly on your own path to transformation. And you can find out more at his website, carlgreer.com. And now, joining me today to share the stories behind the 10 books that influenced him the most on his life journey is former professor of physics at the University of Oregon, theoretical quantum physicist, consciousness researcher, and best-selling author, Dr. Amit Goswami. Dr. Goswami, welcome.
Hi, Sandy. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for giving us an insight into your 10 best books. I must say there's some interesting ones there. There's some classics that show up again and again in people's 10 best lists. And there's a few that I'm not aware of, and I certainly wouldn't have read because I'm not a theoretical physicist and I'm not even a mathematician. It's probably the worst subject that I ever had to deal with at school. But tell me, what was it like for you to have to compile your 10 books? Was it a challenging task or did you find it really easy?
Well, it was hard. It's very challenging to list, 10 out of hundreds of books that I have read. And frankly, I had to struggle. But then I thought, well, okay, what you will want is the development of the entire scientific and spiritual. And therefore, it would not be fair not to mention the physics books that really were very crucial for my overall understandings, which later became the source of the breakthroughs that I had.
Yeah. At what age did you find yourself interested in exploring consciousness?
Well, that's the thing. I had an experience. I was at a conference, and then I realized that I am pretty unhappy as a person because I was jealous of every speaker. I was feeling inadequate. My speech must have been fairly okay, but I was very unhappy about it. And this went on and on the whole day. I have never felt so jealous about other people in my life. So that kind of threw me. So at 1:00, I went outside. There was a party, so I go outside. And then all of a sudden, this thought comes that, why do I live this way? And that question immediately reverberated and came up with an answer, which is that I don't have to. I can integrate my life with what I do. That was what was lacking. I was doing theoretical physics in such a way it has no bearing on my life.
So when was that?
That was 1973.
Wow.
So that started the change, and so I gave up doing the kind of physics I was doing, instead started getting into meaning questions of quantum physics, and that's what eventually led to consciousness.
And today, I imagine there are many people at conferences who are very jealous of you.
Yes, yes, I'm very happy that the winds are turning this way, and people
Yeah.
are very appreciative of quantum theory of consciousness, because this one all the way connects to all the spiritual wisdom traditions. And this is why when I got your letter, it was kind of fun. But then doing it, it was not fun, as I said.
Although I must say that other guests tell me that after they've done it, they think, wow, that was a really interesting process.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like a bit of a life review, they say. Gave them an opportunity to look back over their life and see how much they've changed and what changed them. So let's start with your very first book, which is one that you say made the most impact on your professional life in physics. And that was The Principles of Quantum Mechanics by the English theoretical physicist Paul Adrian Maurice Dirac.
Yeah.
What was it about that book that really made a big impact on you?
Well, usually physics books are written in a kind of recipe way, so that we can quickly learn to calculate, because that's the emphasis. There are a few books which are exception. David Bohm wrote one. I read that one too. But Dirac's book was the most incisive. And, frankly, this is a man who was very special to physics students because of who he was, his personal character. He didn't speak very much, but regarded very highly in physics circles. I have never met him, but I met a student of his. So this student of his was talking about him with such high regards, and he is not a slouch either. And when I did, I was happy that I did, because the understanding of quantum physics takes really a quantum leap. That's a phrase often used in quantum physics. That's what happened to me. All of a sudden, a veil got removed from my eyes. I was not getting the idea that quantum physics really applies to single object. Although the mathematics is done calculating probabilities, and that's what is emphasized in the classroom, and that's what I was learning to do, but that does not really get you the picture that quantum physics creates. So why is it so radical compared to Newtonian physics? And this is where Dirac's book really helped, because it said squarely that no, it's not a probability, a statistical aspect of things. It is really works for single objects. As soon as I realized that, later on, this is when I first read it, I was 17-year-old. That was long, long ago. And of course, I moved on because this idea helped me in doing physics too. But later on, when I came back to quantum physics, this idea was crucial, because people still insisted, many people who want to understand the meaning of quantum physics, they insist that since we have a statistical probability interpretation, who needs to talk about single objects? But I immediately realized that single objects like a single human being or a single biological being like a living cell, these are the stuff that is the most interesting given the state of the world that actually is. I mean, the machine aspects are fine, but we should be the center of science. And I was determined that somehow we must enter, because otherwise, how can I bring physics to life? And I was convinced that there must be an entry, otherwise, why did this momentous experience happen in that particular way? And indeed, Dirac's book became very crucial at that time. Later on, I wrote a book myself in which I, of course, acknowledged Dirac again and again. But that idea that quantum physics is really about a single object was crucial.
It's interesting. I read somewhere that Einstein is supposed to have said that he couldn't understand Dirac, but you did.
Einstein I was a little prejudiced about quantum physics. Of course, he understood everything, but in his own way, he was trying to say that I don't believe in quantum physics. And if you don't believe something, of course, you always say, okay, maybe I don't understand the message. That's why I don't. He was a very, very, very humble man. So he would never directly say anything. He would just say indirectly.
So number 2 is actually more than one book. It is the Feynman Lectures in Physics. Richard Feynman, Robert Layton and Matthew Sands. And I think they started publishing those in 1964.
Yeah, right. And I just came to America. And I was very fortunate. Right after I came in the same year, I went to a Physical Society meeting. Feynman just got Nobel Prize, so he was giving a talk. It may not be exactly that year, but maybe following year. I don't remember anymore. And it was really quite an experience. Feynman's book was very important because, the next challenge for me was how to think of physics without the mathematics. This is I know it sounds a little peculiar, but physicists, we really speak in the language of mathematics, and I could not talk about physics. I really could not present the concepts without thinking of the mathematics. I would immediately have to write down the mathematics. So Feynman helped me. Feynman wrote such clear in language. That's the amazing thing. I mean, he was a absolutely fantastic mathematician too. All physicists have to be of his caliber. And yet he was able to write everything in words so clearly. And so reading Feynman was crucial because I had to think in terms of words, philosophy, in order to understand quantum physics. The answers were not in the mathematics. The answers were consciousness. So thinking in words became very important.
So book number 3 was The Conceptual Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, or The Mathematical Foundations of Quantum Mechanics by John Newman.
Yeah, that's the one that really set out the what we call quantum measurement theory. Before that book was written, people really did not take the measurement theory very seriously. It was all summarized in a mathematical statement called the reduction postulate. And we take that into account. But the reduction postulate actually means, and this is where von Neumann clarified, a measurement. When you measure the possibility wave, quantum physics says objects are a bundle of possibilities, which can be called a wave of possibility. And only when you measure, the possibilities become actuality. What does that mean? Is that possibility has many facets. Like I can have the possibility of choosing to be on your show or not choosing to be on your show, right? 2 facets. I chose the one, of course, to be on your show relatedly. So in this way, what position the electron is going to show up is not given in the quantum equation, but you have to measure. Then only we can tell which position the electron actually is going to show up in physical reality, in space and time. So quantum physics, to make sense of quantum physics, you've got to take into account measurement, and this is what von Neumann did. Without von Neumann, nobody took the measurement process very seriously. Von Neumann said, well, who measures? It's not the Geiger counter. Geiger counter or a cloud chamber or a photograph can take a photograph, but the photograph is also a quantum object. So photograph itself cannot choose. What chooses is observer, observer's
Yes.
consciousness. And
Yes.
that's how the original idea came, that observer is involved. Of course, people found paradoxes with it, and I solved that paradox. That was really my big accomplishment in terms of nitty-gritty. But actually, it was much more than that, because it gave entirely new metaphysics for doing science. So it became very big. But initially, it was just that Newman had created a paradox with his idea, and I solved that paradox.
You know, I was watching a movie last week. It was The Man Who Knew Infinity. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it was released a few years ago, and it was about the Indian mathematician Ramanujan. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but what was so interesting, and I think this was back at the early 1900s, when he ended up going to Oxford, and people just couldn't believe that he had, cracked things that none of the scholars could. But at the end of it, it said at the very end that it's only now that people are beginning to understand that his mathematics is exactly what we need for quantum, to understand quantum physics.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing that is similar in quantum physics as well as every bit of science. These scientific ideas are a matter of intuition. And Ramanujan's life is a clear example of somebody whose intuitive dimensions were far superior than anyone. I mean, they were in history, entire history of mathematics. Of course, people do great discoveries all the time, and their discoveries are no less important. But this instant flashing in his mind, intuition, that is something very special. It reminds you of no less than spiritual people. They are the only others who get answers like that.
So in a way, quantum physics has explained how Ramanujan was able to do what he did. So
yes,
it's like a circular. It's come full circle.
No doubt. So quantum leap and the entire idea of theoretical physics, this is the most amazing thing. So when I had my breakthrough discovery, the first thing I did was to write a paper on theory of creativity, because this is the central point of quantum physics. So long as we consider ourselves as conditioned being, we have materialist physics, materialist science, which gives you pretty good answers already. Behavioral psychology, cognitive behavioral science now. The mechanical part of us is completely answered. But it's the creativity where quantum physics comes in. It's just continuous quantum leaps. How do people take that? So you are absolutely right. And this was crucial. Absolutely.
Yeah. So book number 4, slightly different, The Awakening of Intelligence by Krishnamurti.
Yes, that's a very special book. Of course, Krishnamurti was a great spiritual teacher and contemporary. And, when you do physics of consciousness, the way to approach it, I am really kind of sad to find that so very few people think this way, but it's really not very special thinking. This is how science works. Science, my advisor himself said to me, which was very useful to me, that look, science predicts all kinds of things which are regular. But usually theories would predict also something which is irregular, unusual. And always look at those unusual phenomena. Are there unusual phenomena to explain? That's where you concentrate, not the usual phenomena. So I took that to heart. And so the unusual phenomena about consciousness is its special states, not the usual states. The usual states we all have, even meditative states, it's not that difficult. I did it myself to prove to myself, not difficult. But what happens when you meditate, which I had an experience that was crucial, and that experience told me that the ancient traditions are talking about a state called samadhi, and it really is the case. Because I cannot even imagine doing that again, but I meditated for 7 whole days. How I did it is too much detail. It's not that hard to, because I also had to do my chores and stuff, obviously. But it is kind of continuously doing meditation 7 days. And on the 7th day, I had this breakthrough of a samadhi experience. And for 2 entire days, I was able to love everything and everybody. I don't know how to describe it. I was kind of in altered state of oneness or whatever. So this state of consciousness, how do you explain it? How do you explain an expanded state of consciousness? That was the crucial thing. And when I found with the way that the measurement theory solution forced me to look at, consciousness is one, and it is the one consciousness that creates the world in the presence of observers. We participate. That oneness that I experienced myself was also very crucial. And the idea of doing that was where I took help from mystics such as Krishnamurti, because Krishnamurti describes such experience. He wrote a book with David Bohm, another physicist of fantastic high order. And this book, he describes samadhi. And so I was very inspired by Krishnamurti. And in the book that I mentioned, Awakening of Intelligence, he goes through the kind of blinders that put us off from seeing consciousness in its present-centered oneness. That was very helpful.
So book number 5 is your own book, The SelfAware Universe, How Consciousness Creates the Material World, which follows on very neatly from what you've just been saying about Krishnamurti.
I put that book tongue-in-cheek because it's a bit unusual, but I could not do it, because that book occupied my consciousness from 1981 when I wrote the first draft, and till 1992 when I finished the last draft. So for 11 years, I did nothing else of anything that is of any consequence. I mean, this is the most consequential thing. I was always going back to that book and writing, rewriting. And in that rewrite, I had to read, of course, what I wrote. So this is why I thought, well, this is the book that I have read so many more times than any other book, including Dirac, including Feynman. So I must mention this one.
So were you rewriting based on experiences that you continued to have, or based on research?
Well, this was a mixture. If I did not experience oneness directly, I think I would probably have shied away from seeing my prejudices so clearly, because how I experienced the quantum leap itself was very telling. About the allegory of Plato's cave. So we are like cave people. This is what Plato is trying to tell us. We can only look in front of us. We cannot look behind us, where actually a projector is throwing images of these archetypes on the wall. but we see only the mental representations of it, never think that there is an archetype behind it. And this is our problem. And that's precisely my experience. All of a sudden, I had an about turn in getting my belief system completely upheaval, just completely opposite. Here I was thinking of everything is matter, and that was the source of all the paradoxes. And all of a sudden, I was able to think that no, it's all consciousness. And of course, in the quantum way. And the quantum precise statement, of course, is consciousness is the ground of all being, where all stuff exists as possibilities for consciousness to choose from. Simple statement to understand, but you can see how everything that I said in this list of books that I had given, Dirac, Feynman, everyone's contribution, von Newman, everyone's contribution is in that statement. So it is truly an amazing, amazing thing that happens in a creative experience, a complete about turn like Plato's cave. The cave dweller could look behind him and knew reality in its suchness.
So was that book the one that took you the longest to write?
Excuse me?
That book, that particular book, that was the longest you spent writing any book? 11 years?
That is the book I had to write again and again and again and again to eventually in a publishable form, which is very interesting is that in 1990, I had a fairly good rendition. And so I gave up on it, frankly. I was still writing it again and again, but I stopped sending it to publishers anymore because they're all saying, no, this is whatever. And so this man in my same town as I lived, Eugene, he read it and he said, this is an excellent book. You should publish it. So he took it to Jeremy Tarcher, who was the president of J.P. Tarcher book publishers. And Jeremy was a very unusual man. He single-handedly supported a lot of consciousness research those days.
Yes.
He published unusual books. So my friend was able to convince Jeremy to publish it. So we had a contract. I made more corrections, submitted a final draft, and my editor there, he accepted it, and then it went to Jeremy. And this is the man who everything he has to go through him, and he didn't like it. He said, "No, this is still not strong enough. This is not strong enough case for people to believe you." So then he found me a very incisive editor, and this editor and me worked and worked and worked and worked until it was in that final form. So it was quite an experience. I had to be creative beyond belief. I mean, the book starts with an imagined scenario with Picasso's, my favorite picture of Picasso's Guernica. And I could never have written it unless Jeremy was putting this constant pressure. Got to be interesting, got to make the book a something that is absolutely essential for today's people to relate to.
Yeah. It's definitely got to resonate. And it's interesting because that book was called A Model of Clarity by Kirkus Reviews. So you got there in the end. Persistence.
Yeah.
So book number 6 is The Rediscovery of the Mind by John Searle. And
Yes.
This is the one that talks about, you say it made it clear to you that the mind isn't the brain. The
Yes.
brain, yeah.
SelfAware Universe was written in a very tricky way. And the tricky thing was that I still didn't understand mind. It was a gap in my consciousness. But of course, you know, when you write a book for popular consumption, in scientific paper, it's okay. there I would have written that, okay, but the problem of mind is still not solved, so next subject of research. But in a popular, people cannot say those kinds of things. They have to sort of avoid such issues that you don't know the answer to. So that's what I did. That's what was tricky. But I, of course, was very unhappy about not understanding mind. Is mind still brain? Because mind has that aspect of computability that everybody talks about. Of course, I knew that too. Everybody knows that. Mental stuff has two characteristics. Information is the basic characteristic. And information can be, if it is one-to-one, information can be represented by a symbol. And we can do computation. Symbol processing is what a computer does. Since symbols, mental symbols, information is logical. They logically follow from each other. So this is pretty convincing stuff. And of course, John Searle, he pointed out something that I already knew in connection with creativity. I was writing about it, but this is the thing. It's repeatedly, it amazes me how dense we become when we are focused on one thing. We cannot transfer from one area to another area. So although I was talking about mind and ambiguity and all this, but I could not use the word meaning. And this is where this book, John Searle, actually the book came later. The article that I read, that was what made the difference. The book came 5 years later. Book publishing is a different story, but the article was 5 years earlier, and that's what I read about 1986, 87. And in this, he pointed out with wonderful arguments that mind thinking has two components. One is information, but the other one is meaning. And meaning is something that you cannot define except by analogy. And the analogy he gave, of course, everybody knows, the analogy of grammar. We have syntax and semantics. And that's a fundamental difference, because the syntax, the semantic meaning changes with different contexts.
Yeah.
So those things I knew. I was just not making the connection. So then I realized, so mind has meaning. It cannot be a brain, because brain can only do computing. And so that was a breakthrough. Then my idea of how to incorporate the mind in consciousness thinking, that took another few years, but eventually I got to that.
So mind is non-physical, and we're hearing a lot about this lately. What about memory? Where is memory?
Excuse me?
Where is memory? Mind is not physical. Is memory in the mind? Is that too not physical?
No, mind is not physical. What does that mean? That means that the brain, of course, makes memory of the mind, but the memory is only a symbol that will agitate in me, excite in me the meaning, because the meaning is correlated with it. This is the concept of quantum physics. If two objects are correlated, they become one. So if you interact with one, you will automatically have an access to the other, because the other is one with this that you have access to. So we have access to only the brain, the little brain engram that we make. This is the brain circuit. The neuron that got affected, that got turned on and fired when you have a physical stimulus that excited a thought, and a neuron fired. Neuron makes a representation of that thought. Representation in what sense? In the sense that if you excite that neuron, either through a stimulus or you poke inside with a needle, either way, as soon as you have excited it, the mental memory of it would automatically also play in your mind. This is where I got very upset that I could not also mention Penfield's book in this connection. Penfield as an experimenter. He discovered this, that he was a brain surgeon. So he actually could poke into a epileptic patient's brain without hurting him. And he did a lot of that. And he found that indeed it is true. You poke at a neuron and the person will remember a whole bunch of things. So he was one of the inspirers as well, because he also said clearly, so therefore mind could not possibly be brain. But he was thinking in dualistic terms, and whereas since I have consciousness as the ground of being and quantum physics to guide me, I could think that matter and mind both are possibilities for consciousness to choose from. And so dualism is not necessary anymore. Mind and brain don't have to be separate entity. They could be joined in via consciousness.
What is happening then with Alzheimer's, where people lose their memories?
Yeah, this is a very, very good question. So what happens with Alzheimer's is that the neuron, where the memory is, that gets a plaque. The plaque is called amyloid beta protein.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I apply quantum physics to health. So my collaborator, Valentina Onisor, and I just finished a book on health called Quantum Integrative Medicine, in which we gave a theory of how Alzheimer's happens. How the plaque happens is really very sad. And this is another place where immune system plays a big role. So what happens to these people is that two things are involved. One thing that is involved is that these people don't go into meaning processing, and therefore they are ignoring some of the basic need for the brain, because they are using brain only to process information and are not really, it's a meaning processing that gets us thinking and understanding and using the brain. Information processing does not do any such thing. This is why kids today are becoming dumb and dumber, as they say. This is really true. And this is what happens when we are old, because we don't want to bother. We become too lazy to think about meaning of things, to understand things. And that is a very dangerous thing to do, because then the immune system cannot identify the cell as a brain cell anymore, because brain cell object is to explore meaning. That's only one thing, however. The crucial thing is also that the immune system, often people become very defensive. And so what happens if you are constantly having defensive reactions to stimuli is that, you know all this because of COVID. Everybody now knows what happens, because immune system gets bizarre and emits these inflammatory molecules.
Yes.
And that inflammation molecules is what causes the plaque. That makes the plaque. But inflammation is augmented by the fact that the brain cells cannot be identified by the immune system anymore. And therefore also, like an autoimmune disease, immune system starts attacking body's own cell. So this combination is deadly. And that's how the plaque takes place. And once the plaque is there, that neuron is useless, because it cannot be accessed in the memory that is locked into that. The cell has changed now. It has a covering, and that covering makes it useless for memory storage. So not only the old memory cannot be accessed, these people cannot even make new memory, because the neurons in the hippocampal area, where memory is stored mainly, and also anterior cingulate cortex, they become unavailable for making new memory. So their ability of making short-term memory also disappears. Combination is deadly. Very sad.
Wow. There's a lot more that we could say about that, but we need to move on. Book number 7, famously described as heresy by some scientists, and equally famously, its author's TED Talk was banned by the TED gatekeepers because their science board did not like it. And I love this man's work. A New Science of Life, The Hypothesis of Morphic Resonance, Rupert Sheldrake.
Yeah, New Science of Life was another big breakthrough for me to come across it. Because, for a physicist to come across a book of biology and pick it up itself is an event. But such events happen in my life so repeatedly, it's quite amazing. So this was about the mind. And I was not at all surprised finding Searle's work because I was looking for it. In the case of biology, I was similarly very interested. Okay, so now what's the answer to life? Is there some organizing principle like mind in the creation of life as well? Now you have to understand that I did have biology friends by that time because they knew and I knew life has something that non-living things don't have, albeit molecular biology is popular, but popularity does not make it correct. So many biologists were looking for finding alternatives to this idea that life and non-life are the same thing, play of molecules. So what could be a phenomenon that molecules cannot explain? That was what we are looking for. So I was looking for similar thing, like in the case of mind, there is something that is computable, information, and something that is not computable, meaning. So similarly, I was looking for, is there an organizing principle here which governs life, which is not computable, which is outside of any kind of mechanical description? And then I came across this Rupert Sheldrake, a new science of life, that just interested me vaguely that maybe he's talking about something new. And it was indeed very, very new. And I was so delighted. Although to understand and apply it took me a few years, but I knew that this book, I read it again and again to really grasp, because Sheldrake's language again was dualistic and not quite right. And so it is easy to put the book down, not realizing its importance. But of course, I had learned long time ago that never do that. If something rings true to your intuition, you've got to take it seriously. So I did, and I'm glad I did. There really are crucial points in the development of the quantum science that eventually emerged. One of the crucial things, as I already have said, quantum physics for Newman, and then the other crucial things are these pieces. Mind is one, Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic field is one. Those are the organizing principles that consciousness uses. And eventually, absolutely as essential as the idea that consciousness is the basis of everything. And these ideas are something also interesting from another point of view, which is that you see what is happening. In the spiritual tradition, we have the idea consciousness is the ground of all being, but we don't have any science for it. Why? Because we have not been able to connect that idea with how our body works. All we can say is that somehow consciousness is embodied in us, in human beings. We can do these things. But how we do it, they did not understand, could not understand. And because they could not understand, my prejudice here, but I think it is true, whatever we don't understand, we avoid. We say it's trivial, it's not necessary to understand. And that's what these mystics did. They said that the world is illusory, no need to study it. Let's just go for the oneness, and that's what they did. And that was, of course, totally not what consciousness is trying to do with manifestation. And so the science was as essential as the metaphysics that was already there. So in that way, the main contribution to that metaphysics really was these three people, von Neumann, John Searle, and Rupert Sheldrake. Without their help, the ideas would never gel to find a complete science of all our experiences.
Yeah. Book number 8, you said that this is a book that moved you emotionally. Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Carl Jung. Why did it move you emotionally?
Well, this book was very important because here was a book by a serious psychologist, and yet he is not presenting uh, the ideas in usual scientific way that we present it. He's presenting in a very personal, experiential way. And I realized that this is the way to do this new science, not the old ways. So I started writing my articles also, always pointing out how I got to the idea, what are the breakthroughs, my memories, dreams, and reflections, exactly what contributed to it. And that process was so important for analysis. Now I teach, we have an institution of teaching masters and PhD students, and we teach that same method. That look, in consciousness research, you don't separate out the objects from who is doing it, because who is doing it and how the discovery is taking place in your mind is as important as what you discovered. So that was Carl Jung taught me that.
Yeah, I want to come back to what you just said about your master's and PhD program, because I think this is really fascinating. We'll talk about that in a minute when we finish the list. For now, let's get on to number 9, which is The Life Divine by Sri Aurobindo.
Yes. Now, here is a book which is probably the hardest book in words. I mean, I have, of course, read very hard books in mathematics. That's another language. But, here is just English words. I mean, okay, so very obtuse English about a century ago, old English, but still English words. If you can read Shakespeare, why can't you read Aurobindo? I mean, it's just English. But the concepts were so dense. So this is the hardest book in that list in terms of the density of the concepts. So why did I read it? Because I felt that it was essential. Darwin's theory is a great theory, no question. And he did solve the basic problem in a way that led to a biological science. Before Darwin, there was not really any biology. So all that is true. And I myself have analyzed Darwin's creativity in my books, highest respect for Darwin. But it is also true that Darwin's theory does not explain the data. And especially, it leaves out the data that leads directly to the fact that there is consciousness in biology. Namely, biological evolution. The fossil record shows that fossils go from simple fossils to complex fossils. Darwin's theory has no arrow of time. You cannot tell from fossil record, according to Darwin, whether some fossil was laid back then or some fossil is laid now. And yet, biological arrow of time is a fact, because the fossil records does show clearly older fossils were simpler fossils, newer fossils are much more complex fossils. So what does that mean? What does this arrow of time signify? It obviously signifies that the world happens, evolution happened because of a purpose. It signifies purposiveness. Now you realize that after Aristotle, nobody talks about purpose anymore. When Newton threw away Aristotle's ideas, Newton also threw away the idea of purpose. His ideas, his laws were completely causal. Only cause, initial cause determines everything. And that is the tradition of physics. That is the tradition till this day, until quantum science is changing it, of all science. But evolution, as I said, cannot be understood without purposiveness because of this arrow of time. So how does purposeness come? In quantum physics, it's very, very obvious. Consciousness chooses, and consciousness can easily choose with a purpose. No big sweat. So we have to just redefine the choice. It's choice with a purpose. Purpose what? Purpose to evolve humankind in a more evolved, more civilized, whatever that means. I mean, okay. Civilized to me is archetypes, so more love, more justice, etc. Okay, but is there anybody else who's talking like this? Support. One needs something. This is the revolutionary idea, and Darwin is so much ingrained in biological thinking that even the most maverick biologist, if you say anything against Darwin's theory, you are immediately out of the room. They will not look at you anymore. So this being the case, I needed support. And Aurobindo, I had a feeling, will give me that support. And so this is how I read and read. It took me about 5 years to eventually break through and understand that he is actually talking about a theory of evolution based on consciousness. And he is talking about things that, and then I read Teilhard de Chardin, who is actually easier to understand because his language is much more recent and he writes emotionally. That helps. Aurobindo's writing is very pedantic. So those two people, and here is the limitation of 10 books. I could not mention The Phenomenon of Man, which was a marvelous, marvelous book by Teilhard de Chardin. So that's the story of that one.
And the 10th and final book is one that you describe as your guiding light. And of course, it is the best known and most famous of Hindu texts, the Bhagavad Gita, which comes up again and again and again, no surprise, in people's 10 best lists.
Yeah. And it's not a coincidence that it does. Some of my idols, like Robert Oppenheimer, I had a Bhagavad Gita, copy of Bhagavad Gita in his bedside. And it is a very important book because, when we do quantum science, it is a big break from the traditional spirituality, which seeks that oneness and the world is illusory and all that. Bhagavad Gita, although interpreters can interpret anything any which way they like. So Bhagavad Gita has been interpreted in a lot of ways. But if you read pretty much like a scientist would read, not interpret with a prejudice, but with open mind, then it is very clear that Bhagavad Gita is talking about how to live your life according to spiritual principles. And it is very clear that how you do that is not worry about oneness. How you do that is explore these archetypes. And that's how you live, that's how you gather wisdom, and your life can become which was my other goal because of that initial experience, life can become a synchrony between how you think, how you live, and how you earn your living. So it's all in the Bhagavad Gita, and then the challenge was, okay, so what can we do about the science behind Bhagavad Gita? And thanks to all this previous work, by the way, I again was extremely sad that I could not mention Jesus's book, Gospel According to Thomas. That's another book, as Bhagavad Gita are my real helper. These two books, How to Live, because Jesus was also talking about yoga. Bhagavad Gita was about yoga of daily living. Jesus' book is also about yoga of removing all the dichotomies. Dichotomies that confuses us. Those two books was helpful in terms of, experience is one thing, but transformation, living it, is something else, which I had to discover. So until my life really, until I was 37, that experience happened, my life was kind of, and then the change occurs. But this change, 1973, this change was change in terms of theorizing and developing a theory and having experiences so that I can talk about consciousness better, that kind of thing. And then in 1999, I met Dalai Lama, a part of a group of scientists who were talking to him. And it's a long story, so I will shorten it by saying that we were fighting among each other, whose theory is better than whose. And Dalai Lama just laughed and dissipated all that fight, just like that, by his presence. And then he told me something, told us something that was very touching, which is that you have all these theories. Why don't you apply it to real life? Can you? So I took it to heart. Okay, so I really have not until then. I have been doing it like the traditional scientist. You keep aloof from what you discovered. Little bit more because I was experiencing some of the states of consciousness, but I did not actually use them to live or the challenges of living. I did a little bit. I also had a very challenging wife who kept me honest in the other department. So exploration of love, I had to do that and embody it to some extent. But other than that, my embodiment of these archetypes, concepts of consciousness was minimal. So that's what changed in 1999. From conceptual and experiential, I became a transformational scientist. And this transformation, I now think that without this transformation, you just cannot even really get to the depths of consciousness. It's very simple. They are so impossible from the uninitiated into transformation, like loving someone. I already had a little bit inkling of that, but the work I did with my wife was obviously just the preliminary work. Yes, I took Jesus very seriously. Jesus says, make the two one, male, female is a difference, unnecessary. And so I worked a lot about making the two one and succeeded to a certain extent. She had strength in the heart, I had strength in the mind, so we complemented each other. And that was what I thought Jesus was trying to tell me. But Jesus, of course, was trying to tell me much more about being wholeness, transcending the duality entirely. And that I could not have discovered without actually getting to the challenges of love. Because this love that I had for my wife was still dependent on her cooperating. If she doesn't reciprocate, how do I do it? She is still providing me the basic heart, because I don't have the depth of her heart. On the other hand, I could give language, I could give discourse, I could theorize, so I had depth of mind. So we complemented very nicely. And in another sense, in the body, we have heart chakra and the navel chakra where we experience things. Navel chakra is strong in men, that's the body ego, and the heart chakra is strong in women. And again, we complemented. She was more heart and I was more navel, so I supported her, and that was good, important for her to receive that emotional support. I didn't need emotional support. I was full of confidence, but I, on the other hand, did not have the relationship abilities that she had with much more open heart. So it was again a complementarity between the two of us. It worked for us, but it was conditioned on whether she reciprocates, still conditional. The challenge was how to find unconditional love without any condition imposed on it. And when I underwent that one, this really was the crucial thing. So that person in 1999 who listened to Dalai Lama as the teacher, and he was, that person and this person that I'm talking to you are really very different people. I still remember that person, so that's all there. That's not what I'm saying. But the way I relate to people has taken a fundamental shift. I could not do that before. I could not talk to you as a person, a Sandy who is as conscious as I am. this concept, even this concept that is another person, other, as a consciousness, as a being, that you can totally respect and love, it was just not there, because it was always mixed with, okay, you have invited me for a show, that's your importance. After you are done, right?
Yeah.
And so that way of relating that we do day to day, okay, you can say that's pragmatic, but no, it's not pragmatic, because knowing someone and talking to someone from inside is very different than talking to someone from outside. And we forever remain outside if we do that. So in that way, ultimately, the first 9 books were just science and preparation. But it's the 10th book, along with similar books like Gospel of Cognitive Thomas. These are the real teachings, because they are talking about how to transform yourself, how to really change the way you live.
But do you think that you could have got there without having gone through those 9 books first? Because it has to be an evolution.
You're totally right. I don't think I could have. No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. You describe yourself as a quantum activist in search of wholeness. Do you think that you have found wholeness now?
Well, this is of course, it's a legitimate question. I think we can ultimately only say that we integrate the major dichotomies and don't suffer from the usual conflicts, and that I can say. But on the other hand, there are conflicting stuff in my life. One of the conflicting stuff is, I woke up to these things when I was already getting older. And so I never really dealt with the sexuality in the way of integrating it totally. So much of my talk about sexuality and changing it into love, that path is really not a path that I have traveled. I myself have a handicap there, and I cannot correct it in this life because by age, the whole work, just so sad in a way. The whole work started at age 37, and until I was 50, I was still struggling. The idea started gelling at the age of 50, and then, but sexuality hardly was possible to exercise in any kind of, okay, there is Viagra, I tried that too for a while, but it's not the same thing. And so that's an unfinished work, and I respect that. I respect the work of those people, because they are talking about a very, very important path that eventually has to be integrated in the mainstream path. So there is always things like that which are unfinished. So I would never say that I have achieved wholeness.
But having developed your own theory of reincarnation, the possibility is there.
Yes. I fully believe, and I have evidence of reincarnation in my life again and again and again. And the evidence, outside evidence, external evidence is also great. And the theory is solid. So I have no doubt that reincarnation works. And so I have no doubt that I have to come back and do this thing more. And whether I get to wholeness eventually, we'll see. Cannot predict.
We'll see. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I really do want to talk about your education program, because you're now offering transformative online courses that can lead to a master's and PhD degree in the quantum science of health, prosperity and happiness. So tell us a little bit about those. I was looking at them a bit earlier, and they sound absolutely fascinating.
I would love to. So, this is the thing. We teach things that no other curriculum has been teaching yet, although people do talk about it in flippant ways sometimes, most times. Why is this important? This is important because things are happening in the field of health, prosperity, and happiness, so medicine, business, and psychology, where consciousness comes in a major way. We will not be able to survive very long on this planet until and unless we change our worldview. This is why I call myself quantum activist, because it is most important piece of activism is to the change of the worldview that people have. Today's polarized worldview between materialist science and dogmatic religion got to go because they're just limiting our exploration of potentialities which are necessary for saving the planet, no less. This is not a joke anymore. You know, we used to talk about this and people would say, oh, you are just an idealist. No, it's a practical matter, very practical. How do you solve something like global climate change without being in consciousness, without being how to reduce this consumption level that keeps up and up? People talk about alternative energy, but if our consumption goes up and up with the lifestyle, then it's doomed anyway because we will still continue to have need energy, and then there is no other answer but this old oil energy and replaced by nuclear energy and other very risky energy and so forth. So those issues are really very down to earth and practical, and their solution depends on our becoming more conscious, transformed. This is the motivation behind this school. So what we teach is loaded with ideas of how to live a better health, how to be more happy, and how to be prosperous without being rich. Because prosperity does not depend on how much money you have, it depends much more on your mental situation, how satisfied you are with your life. So this is very wonderful because people look at our curriculum and this is the only place where they can find a course on quantum science of love and relationship. Where have you seen such a course? So in that way, so we teach psychology, medicine, and alternative and conventional, and we teach business and conventional as well as quantum leadership terms. But our contexts are very, very different. Always the whole human being. We don't believe in this separating religious part and scientific part. Especially one challenge, big challenge is to bring back the archetypes in our life because that's how to transform, how to bring purpose and meaning in our life. So this is what we primarily teach. We say from the get-go that, look, here you are going to do things, the same things that others are doing, and so you'll be able to make a living doing the health and care and mental health care and so forth. But your attitude is totally different. You're going to do it from the point of view of increasing meaning and purpose in the person that you are serving. And you're going to do it in a very different way also. You're going to do it by establishing a tangled hierarchical relationship, which means a two-way circularity. You respect, she respects. It's not just I am the doctor, I am giving you something, like that. So the transformation again. So it's a transformational education, basically.
And it's quite unique. So can people do this at their own pace, or is there the semester is the semester and they have to start here and end there with a group of people?
Yeah, so there are altogether 4 semesters for the master's degree, and that's basically courses. But we have the most important course along with the concepts is quantum yoga. We teach practices for doing the yoga, manifesting the yoga in our life. So that is as important, and this is where my collaborator, Valentina Onisor, who is a medical doctor and also a yogi, she is a great help to me. We have other teachers too, but she and I basically play this complementary role. She brings enormous amount of insight into these practices. I bring enormous amount of theoretical insight into the practices. So in that way, I'm very fortunate to find just the right person to do it with. And of course, the rest of the team cannot be ignored either. It's a very wonderful team and sincere, not very many people, 5 or 6 core people, but it's expanding. The big challenge is already solved somewhat, because initially what we thought is, will students come? Although we have kept the tuition very low as I could, because I had to sort of invest in a personal risk way. This is a business that I run, and it took. This is our 3rd year, and still now it's not running completely on its own, but basically it is running fine. We have about 50 students, and that's good. And number seems to be going up. So we have, I think, basically we have solved the problem. It is going to work, and we are producing our first master's degree holders. That's already finished. People have done their degree, and some people are going to get their PhD in another year, about 4 or 5 students. So we are on our way. And what happens when you do that, when they learn quantum yoga, when they are developing some emotional intelligence to people, is astounding. Simply astounding. Sandy, you have to just come and sit in one of our webinars and see the connection.
I would love to. I would love to.
When
When is the next year starting?
Next what?
When is the next one starting? I mean, is it starting at the beginning of next year?
Next semester is this year, December 15th. That's when.
Oh wow, that's quick. A week's time.
So we are right in the process of enrolling students for this new semester. We have twice a year. We enroll people first semester and also the second semester.
Oh,
it's
okay.
Online, but there is a 10-day proximity education that they have to get. That's a rule in Indian affiliation. It's a rule of the government. We could not bypass it. But it's very good because proximity is needed. Much of it can be done on the internet, agreed, but some things works much more in proximity. So I'm glad that COVID is finally relenting and we can travel again. And so we are very much looking forward to next year.
Well, I think this sounds like a really interesting course. Absolutely. Sort of thing that I would want to take. Amit Goswami, it has been such a treat speaking with you, and I want to thank you for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. I'm sure people will find it very, very useful.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Really nice being on this show. The whole idea is astoundingly wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, before we close, you can find everything that you need to know about Dr. Amit Goswami's Center for Quantum Activism, his books, blogs, courses, his degree courses and events at amitgoswami.org. And if you don't want to miss any live streaming episodes in this weekly series of 10 Best Spiritual Books interviews, you can sign up to save your space and be the first to know who's coming up next and receive last-minute reminders on the video page at the website sedgbeer.com, where, while you're there, if you know you have a book in you but don't know where to start, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be the catalyst that you've been looking for. That brings us to the end of this week's show, which will be available on major podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the No BS Spiritual Book Club's 10 Best Spiritual Books interview series. Till then, it's goodbye from me. Thank you, Amit.